My name's Tim Fowers, and I'm here for creating Burgle Bros, or Burgle Brothers, it's still undecided, Fantasy of the Heist. All right. Is this focus? Okay, how do I have to give focus to this thing, do I? Is that? There we go. Okay. All right. So I'm an indie developer. I started about 10 years ago, and I made a couple indie games on my own and with some friends. And one was called Now Boarding, and we did that for a couple years. And they kind of, over time, it wasn't always working out long term. And like, well, let's head it over to the industry. So I worked at Amazon Game Studios in Southern California for 3-4 years. And then kind of during all these processes on the side, I was kind of working on board games because I kind of fell in love with making video games and board games at the same time. And I really see them as kind of two sides of the same coin. So I made a game called Paperback and a game called Burgle Bros. And both have done really, really well. And I've been trying to take that indie aesthetic, that's the skills you learn being an indie and doing these really kind of quality games, and bring it over to board games, and it's proven to work out really, really well. And so I'm going to talk about the differences between board games and video games, because they're similar, but the difference is that board games are software that run on people. So you're writing this code, and people have to ingest this all, have this going in their brain, and you don't want to break the compiler. You don't have too many rules, and they're the ones that they're experiencing these rules, but it's all transparent, because video games are like this black box, right? You're giving it inputs, and you're getting certain outputs, and you're trying to figure out what the rules are inside that box, and you get kind of a sense of what's going on, but it still surprises you in certain ways. But the ways that board games surprise you are through, all the rules, all the rules are in your head, and they'll combine in new ways, and you're like, oh, that's a combination. I didn't think of using that card and that card together, or powers together, or whatever. And so it's this delight through emergence, not through finding out a new rule of what's going on under the hood. And the other thing about board games is it's very raw design. You, as a designer, you've got a box of parts and instructions, and it's got to sing. It's got to entertain and pull all these emotions out of people. And we talk about a lot of emotions in video games, but there's a lot of emotion in board games. And I want to talk about some of the range of emotions you can have here. So you've got your werewolf mafia, and that's about and Secret Hitler. It's about deceit. What's the key moment in that game when you're it's when everyone believes you and you've got them all fooled. If you want to turn it up higher, I don't know if many people play this, but diplomacy is literally you have to stab all your friends in the back to win one at a time. Gain their trust, and it's like Survivor. You're voting them off at the last minute, and it's tragic. And do not play it. It will end friendships. Because that's the level of emotion that board games can create. And then there's, Settlers. It's about reciprocity and trade. And you have Ticket to Ride, where it's about prioritizing, building your network. But in cooperative games, it's about altruism. It's about sacrificing for each other and collectively problem solving. And there's all these positive emotions around it, and that's why I've been drawn to it, because in board games you test a lot and you test live, and I get driven by the energy that comes off of cooperative games. So where do we derive our emotions from? And a lot of times it's from other media. Let's see, there we go. Other media, so we watch these movies, TV shows, books, and they all have these moments, right? That we want to capture, and so often in video games we think literally. We're like, okay, well let's capture, the scene or the visual or the cinematography, but I think that what we really want, what we can get to with video games and with board games is the emotion at the core of it. And because really what it comes down to is these scenarios, am I doing a heist? Am I surviving on an island? Am I learning kung fu? They get to the point of what would I do in that situation? Like that's when I talk about the fantasy of the heist is like, we really ask ourselves this when we're looking at different media, and you're like, yeah, if I could fly, I would do X, or there's all these kind of scenarios we put ourselves through. And so through developing Burgle Bros, I've kind of got a system now that I use, and this wasn't all intentional, but this is the method that I came to, was that you take a scene or a moment in what you're trying to, your source material, whatever that material is, and you peel it back and you find at the nugget, at the best moment of that scene, what are you actually feeling? And then you try systems to recreate it. You try choices, and you try game systems, game mechanics to reproduce it. And it takes a lot of iteration to find something that can get the emotion that you want. Because anytime you create a system, there's going to be other things, unintended consequences. So you got to clean it up, and you got to have to mitigate certain parts of that system that you don't really want. And then you tie it back into the theme. You're like, okay, if we have the system, what else would happen in that mechanic, and weave it back into your theme. And this is the method that I've kind of discovered with Burgle Bros. So I started with a hybrid game. I was working on an app that you interacted with a board game, and it was about a heist. And I went to Gen Con. I'm demoing this game, and I'm like, because you go and you get people to play test when you're a board game creator. You're like, okay, come play my game, and you got to convince this guy that doesn't know who you are that this game is awesome. And I'm like, okay, it's like Ocean's 11, the board game, and their eyes like lit up, and they're like, I want to play that game. And they'd come over and they'd play it, and the game was horrible, and I apologized to everybody that played it because it didn't fulfill that. But that put this bug in my head. I'm like, this is something people want. People want to live out a heist, and they want to know what choices they would make in that situation. So I came up with Burgle Bros. And Burgle Bros was this. I'm going to talk about the process of how we got there. But the high level is it's a cooperative heist. And this is a fun tower that you can play it on, but you normally play it flat. And you have these 3 floors that you're exploring. Now, if anybody gets caught, it's over. It's kind of to have the high stakes, because if you get caught, you're gonna rat on your friends, and so you don't go to jail. And so it's 3 floors, and there's a safe on each one, and there's a whole sequence of how you open the safe and find the combination to the safe, and then but on top of everything is all these tiles are alarms and traps with different rules about how you can get through them and whether they trigger an alarm. And then on top of that, there's this guard patrolling on each floor, and he's using a waypoint system, and so you have these 3 stealth tokens, and everyone has 3 stealth, and if you lose all 3 of your stealth, you're caught. So that's the stakes. So going back to the source material, let's look at a heist, right? These are the tropes of a heist, and these aren't all of them, but these are some high points, right? So we're going to assemble the team. We're going to get we're going to get out of jail or whatever. We're going to assemble the players, right? And then we're going to make a plan. We're going to pick our target, make a plan, and there's always a montage of all the different alarms and guards we have to get through and how impossible it is. And then, and then you start the plan, and you're evading the guards and getting through all the alarms, and everything's going according to plan. And you get to the safe, and you're cracking the safe, or you're downloading the thing, and little bars going, and you're sweating bullets. And then something goes wrong. Like there's always something that goes wrong. There's a twist, right? And then, you pull off a miracle, like or maybe you had a plan all along. You had a backup plan, and it comes into effect, and then there's the grand exit. It's like, yeah, we made it out, and high fives, and go spend our money, right? So let's break this out. So assembling a team, the core emotion here is how am I going to contribute to this team? So it's partially contribution, but I think there's something underneath there. When you're picking a character, you're often like, okay, well, what powers does he have? Like, what can he do? And often when you're designing these kind of roles, you want to think like, how can everybody break one rule of the game? Because that makes you feel powerful and special in a group, and that's interesting. But underneath, there's a character to each one of these, and so I had these different personas we developed, and because you're putting on a mask when you're playing a character, and this is in a lot of games, and And this is part of the whole, what would I do in this situation? And so now you're taking on a character of what I would do in that situation and experimenting and seeing what you would do. How does this reflect on who I am? So that's just assembling the team. So putting on the mask. So then making a plan. So early on in the design of Burgle Bros, it was about like, okay, what's going on? Where are the guards going to be? Let's plan the whole thing out. Because that's a big part of the fantasy, but it really ended up conflicting with the ability to make kind of tactical decisions and whatnot. Because if you think about it, like if you had to plan the whole thing, and then if you were wrong, you kind of just have to play the game again. Like it didn't make an interesting loop. And so there's some counterintuitive things that I had to move away from the trope. And this is one of them. It was because people are like, so you're breaking into this building and you know there's a safe there, but you literally know where none of the alarms are. Like you guys are not well-educated thieves going into this place. But it was an important decision. And how this kind of works is the emotion that was more important to me was the perfect prediction. And this is the moment where the guard's walking by and I'm perfectly stepping behind every statue, and I'm doing everything in sync, and I'm totally predicting everything the guard is going to do, and I feel awesome because there's no way he's going to find me, and that led to a couple different systems. One is these tiles, so you're exploring, and you have to take certain risks. These tiles start face down, and you can decide to run into a tile and see what it is and hope that it's not bad, or you can peek, but it's slower. So you have to decide how quickly you want to do this. And that gives an information horizon. You're like, okay, I know I've already seen some of these tiles. I don't know what that could be, but I'm going to take a risk. And then on top of it is the waypoint system for the guard. The guard, he moves towards the next waypoint, but then after that, he's going to draw a card, and you don't know if he's going to go left or right. You've got to take a guess. And so this creates these smaller moments, these small dynamic puzzles between the static puzzle of the tiles and the walls you have to move around, and the dynamic puzzle where the guard is at the time. You have to take a guess, and by making the players take a risk, if it pays off, then they're like, oh, I knew it. I knew he'd go that way, and you feel like that prediction, right? You feel like I pulled it off correctly. And if he doesn't, we had to create the other end, because a big part of stealth is that it's high stakes. I mean, that's the thing about stealth games. Often in stealth games, you get caught, you're shot, or you go to jail or whatever. And so I wasn't sure how to do this. I wanted to have high stakes, and this is where you don't really design alone. I mean, people in board games probably design more alone than they do in video games, but I went to my friend, and I'm like, I don't know what to do. I want people to lose, I want to have high stakes, and he's just like, well, just give them like hit points. They can get, and so we came up with these stealth tokens, and you disappear, and you get 3 chances to hide from the guard, and then you don't have any more, and next time he catches you. And what it introduced is a soft loss, because you don't get the stealth back, but you have this definite progress towards losing anytime you're in the same tile as one of the guards. All right, so perfect prediction is that fantasy. So cracking the safe. So cracking a safe is you're trying to do it quickly as you can, but it's this unknown. You're like, I can't do anything. It's only going to crack so fast, or I got to guess numbers, and you feel this pressure because you don't know when the guard's going to come. So that's the emotion here is you're going to get caught, right? And so I definitely wanted some randomness, and you really got to watch the randomness though, because when we first did it, we're like, oh, if you roll the right numbers, you get in, and it was just kind of like quick. Like sometimes it was really quick, and sometimes it was too long, and it was frustrating. And again, I went to a friend, and I'm just like, well, how do you mitigate this luck problem? Because I want it to be random, because then when you roll the 6, there's this cheer. But so came up with a system, and it was like you can invest in more dice. So you can make a safer, you can roll more dice when you do roll dice, and it makes the whole thing safer. Or you can be riskier, we can do it with like 1 die or 2 die. We're lucky, and then, but it might take you twice as long. And that certainly happens. And then the other part of like, I'm working on the safe, and I don't know how long it's going to take, and then there's the guard. The guard is coming. And when we first played it, there was this moment where after every player's turn, the guard on that floor moves. And so somebody's like, so if I go upstairs, only that guard will move? And I'm like, well, yeah, it's kind of like the movie where the action is only where the camera is. So like if the camera's up here, you assume that nothing's happening on this other floor. So what it allowed as a side effect, so he's like, so if I go upstairs, he won't get caught. He's like, well, I'm like, I guess not. So now a whole part of the game is manipulating the guard through which floor are you going to activate. So where are you going to end your turn? And some people even didn't like that. They're like, that's unrealistic. Why aren't the other guards moving? And I'm like, it works as a tool to give the players to solve their problems. And it also gives us another thing. And little side note is about vulnerability. And the TED Talk about vulnerability and how it's how we form relationships as humans, it's core to cooperative experiences. And if you think about Left 4 Dead, right? Left 4 Dead, you get pinned, right? And a zombie's on you and you literally can do nothing. And then one of your friends comes over and kicks the zombie off and shoots him, and he reaches down and he pulls you up. And he's accepted you as a friend, but also as you're important to this mission, you're important to this team. And sacrificing for each other and giving these moments where I can save someone else is how relationships are formed. And I just think it's really important. Side note. So something always goes wrong, right? So this is the best laid plans, and it's tricky in a board game. Like I didn't know how to have the twist where something goes wrong. And how do I get that paced in the game, and how does that even fit in? And it actually came from kind of the most benign part of the game. There was this moment where one of my friends was playing, and he's like on the bottom floor, and he's like, so there's a guard outside, so I'm literally going to do nothing on my turn. And I'm like, well, yeah. And we came up with this thing where when you don't use a certain number of actions, you roll a dice. And that can be something good or something bad, but it's an unknown. And then eventually it became like a deck of cards. And it actually, if you think about it, like the moment that you're hiding in the closet and the guard is coming by is exactly when something is going to crash. And something, or a cat's going to spook something, or something good or bad is going to happen. And so we call it the event deck, and it ended up being this great way to both mitigate kind of the boring moments of the game, but also it only happens a couple times per game. And so it was a nice way to parse out these moments that could be plot twists. And sometimes it'll save you too. It's a variable. So all these things are happening, right? The guards are speeding up over time. We crack open a safe. Now, when you get a safe open, you get two things. You get a loot. This is what you came to steal, and it could be like a chihuahua that randomly barks and sets off alarms or something. They're silly things that you came here to steal. And then you get tools. It's a one-shot ability. So these tools are like an EMP or a crowbar, and they give you one chance like to do something really cool. And so all these things are moving towards kind of the climax of like, okay, the guards are moving super fast. We're all low on stealth. How are we going to do? And how are we going to get out of this? And this is where this is the tension is the core emotion here. And this forced players into a corner of sorts, like is more of an emotional corner than a physical corner, but sometimes it's a physical corner. But it was that they're stuck. They're like, okay, we're going to lose. And I'm like, no. Just, you can figure out something. And they would surprise me. And they're like, I got it. If I go here and trigger this alarm, or I use my gadget, I use my tool, or I use my player power. And they started really thinking laterally and coming up with really creative solutions of how to get out of these problems. And it surprised me. I was just creating a system and turning up the heat. And people are like pulling off these crazy moves. And I'm like, okay, that's a really good solution to that. And it doesn't always pan out either. Sometimes they fail, right? And looking at failure is part of it as well. And how people see failure. Like after a game, you really don't want people being like, that was arbitrary. You want people saying like, I could have done X. I could have done another thing that would have let me win. And so having that couch, having that emotional scapegoat really helps people want to re-engage and want to retry a game. And often cooperative games, people want a challenge. They often don't want to win on their first game. So they can feel like, they're like, okay, I know what's going on now. We're going to win this one, and they'll get back into it. So then there's the grand exit, right? So we got past the hardest problem in the game, and we got the loot, and we're headed out. And this emotion is the relief. So we had all the tension and the problem solving, and the relief is that we made it out. And this is where you really want the dramatic exit. This is like drop the mic, smash the guitar, do a victory lap. It's like you want to feel awesome and you want to leave a mess. You just you're like, you know what? And so we have this dramatic exit where you're leaving on a helicopter on the roof. And there was another side effect of the whole guard rules was, if I go to the roof, there's no guards up there, so no guard moves on my turn. And so there's this moment where we're out of here, and everyone gets to leave, and the guard doesn't get a move, and you feel like it takes the pressure off when all of a sudden you have an easy out. And then there's also other moments where people surprise me, they're like, so I have this tool that can make a staircase anywhere. I say we leave here, beep, and the roof comes out and grappling hooks go up, and they're like, we're just going to leave right here and exit to our helicopter. And it surprised me, and it was a great moment. So the overall emotion, right? So how do these all add up? You're creating all these individual moments, but how do they sum together into the takeaway? When I talked about these other board games, and it kind of took me a while to realize what it was. And for Burgle Bros, it was cleverness. That I feel shrewd and clever, and I outwitted them, and in a non-combative way. And this is where you want to, and then you decide where you're going to spend your money. And so this is where you evaluate. You're like, okay, I'm looking back at my game, and what moments or emotional beats from the source material did I reflect in my game, and which ones didn't? Because they're not going to all make it in. But you have to look at which ones are pushing towards the emotion that the overall emotion you're shooting for. And remember that there's short-term emotions. So there's a crisis, I have to make a decision. I'm rolling a die, I'm drawing a card, and there's a moment, right? But there's also longer emotions. There's the dramatic. There's is my character transforming? Am I getting stronger? Are the waters rising? Is the pressure getting higher? Is there a climactic battle? Are these moving towards an overall dramatic arc? And that's satisfying from a storytelling perspective. So coming back to games as a personality test. So this is, I think, at the core of what games are. So you've had this mask on, and now you take the mask off, and you're like, how did it feel to be that character? Is that who I am? Is that me? Do I want to be more of that person? And then you see all these other masks, and you're like, I want to try that one next time. And I think there's a lot of self-discovery, going on, because in the end you're answering the question of what did I do? What would I do in that situation? If I was on an island, yes, I would, I'd figure out fire and I'd make a hut or whatever. And each of these is games or systems that let us answer these questions. And the bigger thing is when I talk about all these unintended consequences that came out of things, it's like I was shooting for emotions through these systems, but then the real output of these was actually stories. So when people tell me about Burgle Bros, they're like, okay, this one time, and then they go through the whole story of the sequence of events that happened and what they did and what the guards did and everything, and it's their story. It's the game reflected back on them, and they were able to tell a story about who they were in that situation. And so the bigger thing about what would I do in the situation is when you have an answer, you now have something that you're going to tell. And more often, the failure is the better story. The spectacular failure is the one that people tell. And so games as story generators, I think is what we're getting at when we're saying emotion, because it's not just that you want them to, a movie is going to make you feel a particular way, and a game can make you feel a lot of different ways because it's through the lens of yourself. And that's it. Thank you for your time. So, are we on time? Okay, we're good. Let's do some questions if you guys got some questions, and happy to talk to anybody after as well.
Hey, big fan of Burgle Brothers, but one thing I was wondering about when you talk about the emotion and controlling that is there's so much randomness between the setup and the cards that players get. How much effort did you spend in the design to not let things get too easy or too hard?
I had to, because it's basically a roguelike board game. right? There's all these variables. Very early on, I locked in the guard system and a lot of the tiles. And I just played it a lot. It was almost a brute force. I mean, sometimes you can Monte Carlo. There's always ways you can simulate board games. But I had to literally get a sense of how much. And even right after the Kickstarter, I was like, okay, it's a little too easy. And I just changed just a couple card distributions, and it ended up pretty good. But it was a lot of work just to get a sense of it. But it was I guess work. I can't say that there's a specific thing, but I mean, I try to make each individual obstacle not unsurmountable. So like every event that comes up or every tile that comes up, there is a way around it, or multiple ways around it. But not just like you're hosed, because anything that feels super arbitrary and you get stuck at that point can throw off both your distribution, but also just throw off the experience. So, thanks.
Hello. So this might be a little bit of a negative space question, but you mentioned that you had given up on planning, like the planning aspect of it, right? And I worked on a stealth game in the past, and we ran into similar issues, like planning's really hard. But it really feels like that is a core part of most heist things.
Yeah.
We gave up on it as well. So I was wondering, what were the iterations that you tried, if you tried more? And was there anything that remotely worked? And if something did, why did?
It was mostly like conceptual. So this is why, I mean, to repeat the question, why not have the planning phase in the stealth? It was just that we started to break out, like, okay, what information could you have? Would that information be useful? How much of a plan could you make? And we started, so I had a friend that we were kind of brainstorming this idea with, and he's like, yeah, I had this idea for a planning game, and I had my horrible, hybrid game, and we started brainstorming, and then I started getting on this thread where I'm like, oh, and once I figured out how the guards moved and whatnot, and then I did 15 pages before he came back. He's like, I think you're just running with this idea, and it just bore fruit, right? It's just like sometimes in design, like there is kind of the system that seems to be clicking and working, and there certainly is another game. I'd love to make a prequel that's like it sets up a game of Burgle, and but and there's other games to be made. So,
thank you.
Yeah. All right, thanks, guys. I'm happy to talk individually. So.